My name is Margaret Hollis, and I am 68 years old. At this stage in my life, I had believed the hardest chapters were long behind me. I had weathered a difficult first marriage, raised my daughter alone for years, rebuilt my career twice, survived the loss of both my grandparents, and spent more time than anyone should navigating the emotional minefield that was my relationship with my parents. I had come to peace with all of it, or so I thought, and settled into a gentle rhythm of quiet mornings, long walks, and evenings spent in the sunroom reading or knitting or simply listening to the wind against the windows. And then, at 66, I met Thomas. It's strange how life can still surprise us after decades of hardness. Thomas was patient, thoughtful, and slow to speak. Nothing like my first husband, who had lived as though the world were always testing him and everyone was somehow failing him. Thomas laughed easily, honored silence, respected boundaries, and treated me like a partner rather than a prop. After 2 years of companionship that matured into something deeper, he asked me to marry him. I said yes. It was the easiest yes of my entire life. We didn't want extravagance. At our age, we didn't need spectacle. A simple ceremony in early autumn, under the copper leaves on the property behind his home. Our children, his 2 sons and my daughter, would stand with us. The reception would be small, with soft music, candles, and a long table covered with dishes everyone helped prepare. Just a sincere celebration of a late-life love neither of us expected, but both welcomed wholeheartedly. Planning the wedding was peaceful, until my parents entered the conversation. Or rather, until they didn't. My mother, now 84, had always been a woman who relished control. She curated her life as though she were arranging a museum exhibit. Every object placed for effect, every gesture performed to maintain an image of polish. My father, now 87, had once been a stern but competent businessman, though over time competence gave way to pride, and pride gave way to an almost brittle defensiveness any time money or reputation came into question. Growing up, I had learned to tiptoe around their expectations. My choices were tolerated but rarely supported. Love in our household was conditional, awarded when I performed to their standards and withheld when I did not. I had forgiven much of that in adulthood, or perhaps simply learned to compartmentalize it. We maintained a cordial distance defined by predictable holiday visits and occasional phone calls. So when I told them I was remarrying, I naively believed we might share a moment of warmth. I didn't expect money. I didn't expect involvement. I only wanted them to acknowledge the happiness I had finally found. Instead, the first thing my mother asked was, "Will the wedding be tasteful?" Not, "Are you happy?" Not, "Tell us about him." Not, "How lovely." Tasteful. I brushed it off, comforted by the idea that their quirks, annoying as they were, couldn't ruin the joy I felt. But something shifted in them the moment I mentioned the prenup. A simple, sensible agreement between 2 older adults who each had their own homes, savings, and children. The instant the word left my mouth, my father stiffened, and my mother's polite smile evaporated as though I had announced something shameful. "Why on earth," she asked sharply, "would you sign something like that?" "It protects both of us," I explained. "It protects our kids too." My father's voice dropped into that old familiar register, disapproval dressed as concern. A marriage is supposed to be a merging, not a separation of assets. I didn't argue. I merely repeated that it was mutual, fair, and peaceful. But the air had changed. Something in their eyes had darkened. And for the rest of the call, they asked strangely specific questions. About my savings, about whether my home would remain solely in my name, about the insurance policy I'd purchased the year prior. It was all delivered under a veil of politeness, but I felt the undercurrent. The calculation. I ended the call uneasy. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the moment. 2 weeks later, when they refused to contribute anything to the wedding, followed immediately by something incomprehensibly audacious. A request. No, a demand. For $50,000. And they wanted it written directly into my prenup, as though they were entitled beneficiaries of my marriage. It was a rainy afternoon when the conversation happened. I had stopped by their house after running errands nearby, expecting nothing more than a cup of tea and small talk. Instead, I walked straight into a performance, one that would have been admirable in its choreography if it weren't so deeply unsettling. My mother sat in her favorite armchair, hands folded neatly, face expressionless. My father stood behind her with his arms crossed, stoic and unreadable. Something was wrong. I could feel it before they said a word. "We've been discussing your wedding," my mother began. My heart sank. Every time she opened a sentence with that tone, polished, impenetrable, I knew the outcome would never be good. My father cleared his throat. "We're not going to be contributing financially." I blinked. "I didn't ask you to." "We know," my mother said, "but we want to be clear. We can't. And we won't." The emphasis on won't stung more than I cared to admit. But I nodded, trying to keep the peace. "That's perfectly fine. Truly." I thought the conversation would end there. It didn't. My father stepped around the armchair, his expression shifting from impassive to almost businesslike. "However, there is something you can do for us." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He glanced at my mother, who gave him a small nod. Then he turned back to me with a serene confidence that made my stomach tighten. "We want you to allocate $50,000 from your assets," he said. "Set aside in the prenup. As a family provision." I genuinely thought he was joking. I laughed. For a moment, both of them looked insulted that I would dare find it absurd. "You're asking me," I clarified slowly, "to write a $50,000 payment to you into my marriage contract?" My mother's lips tightened. "It's not a payment. It's a recognition." "For what?" "For everything we've invested in you," she said, as though she were quoting a scripture. I felt something cold bloom in my chest. "Is there some urgent need? Are you in trouble? Why would you ask me for that?" "That's our business," my father said simply. "And this is your opportunity to show gratitude." Gratitude. My mind raced through memories, years of emotional manipulation, criticism disguised as advice, support withheld as punishment. Gratitude. "I'm not putting anything like that in my prenup," I said firmly. My mother's face shifted into a mask of gentle disappointment. "You're being selfish." My father's voice hardened. "We said no to your wedding expenses because we anticipated this conversation. We didn't want to mix small contributions with a larger obligation." Small contributions. Obligation. I felt suddenly nauseous. "I'm not giving you $50,000, I repeated. Their reaction was instantaneous. Their composure cracked as though I had struck a nerve long frayed. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes narrowed with something sharp and familiar, resentment disguised as sorrow. "If you don't help us," she said coldly, "we will have no choice but to consider other measures." "What measures?" Silence. They held my gaze, letting the implication hang in the air like a threat. I left their house feeling frozen, disoriented, betrayed. I drove home in a fog, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I knew my parents could be selfish, but this, demanding such a sum, refusing transparency, framing manipulation as duty, this was something else. Something darker. And I had no idea how dark it would become. Because the very next morning, I received a letter from them, formal, typed, and signed, making the demand official. The letter arrived in a crisp envelope, addressed in my father's precise handwriting. I opened it at my kitchen table, alone except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. The letter wasn't emotional. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't even personal. It was formatted like a contract. "We, Harold and Elaine Hollis, request a family provision of $50,000, payable through the prenuptial structure for Margaret Hollis's upcoming marriage." Page after page of legal-sounding phrasing followed, none of it actually legal, all of it theatrical. The tone was one of entitlement, as though the money were already theirs and they were merely informing me of the appropriate process to deliver it. At the end, a line, "We trust you will honor your family." That sentence, 5 simple words, dragged my entire childhood back into painful focus. Growing up, my parents used that phrase constantly. When I didn't want to attend a social event that bored me senseless, they said I must honor your family. When I wanted to study art instead of business, they said to honor your family. When I cried after my father yelled at me for getting a B in math, my mother asked if tears were how I intended to honor your family. Obedience, not love, had always been the currency of our household. I grew up believing I was ungrateful if I questioned anything, selfish if I had needs, disloyal if I had boundaries. My first marriage echoed those lessons. My ex-husband, Robert, thrived on control. Whenever I tried to assert myself, he weaponized guilt. When I finally left him at 57, my parents called me dramatic, irresponsible, embarrassing. They didn't ask why I left. They didn't ask how I felt. They didn't ask if I was safe. They asked how my divorce would make them look. I saw the patterns clearly now as I stared at the letter. My parents weren't asking for support. They were exploiting the old dynamic. My trained reluctance to disappoint them, my historical tendency to yield. But this time, I wasn't the girl they could intimidate into silence. Still, something felt off. Their behavior wasn't just manipulative, it was frantic, urgent, desperate. There had to be a reason. That night, as I sat in my sunroom watching dusk fall across the yard, I felt a slow, steady certainty settle over me. If they wanted $50,000, they needed it. And if they wouldn't tell me why, then the reason was something they desperately wanted to hide. I poured a cup of tea, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and made a decision that would change everything. I would find out the truth myself. And the first clue appeared where I least expected it, overheard through my parents' kitchen window. A week later, I drove to my parents' home to return some old tax files they had asked me to bring months earlier. When I arrived, I saw their car in the driveway but couldn't find them inside. I assumed they were in the backyard. As I approached the back door, I heard voices through the open kitchen window. My mother's voice. Low, agitated, nothing like her usual polished tone. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing," she said sharply. "Margaret always caves. She's soft." My breath caught. A muffled male voice responded, someone I didn't recognize. "We need that money," my mother continued. $50,000. The attorney said it has to be in one lump sum. Attorney. Lump sum. My pulse quickened. The male voice asked something I couldn't make out. My mother replied tightly, "Of course she'll pay. She's always been more afraid of disappointing us than anything else." It felt like a slap. I stepped away from the window before I could hear more, my heart pounding so hard I felt lightheaded. I quietly backed toward my car, hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. They were hiding something serious, something legal, something that cost $50,000. And they were banking on my old wounds to secure it. As I drove home, I replayed every strange moment from the past few months. The sudden interest in my finances, the insistence on the prenup details, the cold refusal to contribute to the wedding, the immediate pivot to demanding money, the eerie confidence that I would do the right thing. They weren't proud. They weren't offended. They weren't disappointed. They were desperate. I spent the next 48 hours researching. Methodically. Quietly. Without emotion. Property records. Loan filings. Public databases. Piece by piece, a troubling picture emerged. First, they had taken out a large home equity loan 2 years earlier. Bigger than I realized. Bigger than they could afford. And they were behind on payments. Second, my mother had a civil notice attached to her name, something involving a misrepresented investment partnership. The details were sparse, but the amount in question was substantial. Third, my father had taken out several short-term loans, high-interest, predatory ones, despite having always insisted he was financially comfortable. Fourth, a county court search revealed pending negotiations tied to something listed as potential civil liability. And then, perhaps the most disturbing of all, I found paperwork connecting my parents to a defunct real estate venture. A failed project with investors who had lost money. The pieces fell into place. They weren't asking for $50,000. They needed it. To cover debts. To fund a settlement. To avoid escalation. Maybe even to avoid charges. Still, the picture wasn't complete. Until I received an email that tied everything together. It was from my younger brother, David, and what he revealed changed everything. David and I had never been close. He had always been the favored child, the charming one, the golden one, the one our parents praised endlessly. I didn't resent him. I resented the dynamic. But we had managed to maintain a distant, civil siblinghood throughout adulthood. So when he emailed me, the subject line alone, "You need to know," sent a chill through me. The email was brief. "Maggie, Mom and Dad are in serious trouble. They dragged me into it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. But you need to understand what's really happening before they pressure you further." Attached was a PDF. I opened it, bracing myself. It was a legal complaint. A detailed, formal document filed by several individuals alleging that my parents, and David, who had unknowingly signed paperwork for them, had participated in a misleading investment scheme. According to the document, they had solicited money for a family-backed real estate partnership, providing assurances that had been exaggerated or outright false. When the project collapsed, investors lost thousands. Now they were pursuing legal action. And the settlement estimate? $50,000. David's email elaborated. They told me it was safe. They pressured me to sign. I didn't know how bad it was. Now they need 2 lump sums to finalize the settlement. One from them, one from me. But I can't pay it. And they're insisting you will. They told the attorney you were reliable and wouldn't abandon family. My stomach twisted. They had planned this. Not just the manipulation. Not just the guilt. They had counted on me financially. Without asking. Without explaining. Without ever considering my autonomy. David ended his message with words that broke something open inside me. They believe you're predictable, Maggie. They think you're still the daughter who bends. But you don't owe them the consequences of their decisions. Please be careful. I felt anger rise, not wild or explosive, but steady, focused. The kind of anger that forms only after decades of being underestimated. That night, I organized every document into a single chronological binder. Their loans. Their property records. The civil notices. The court filings. David's email. The legal complaint. I didn't create the binder to shame them. I created it to confront the truth with clarity. With boundaries. With integrity. And when it was complete, I invited them to a conversation. Not a fight. A reckoning. They arrived confident, until I placed the binder on the table between us. We met at Thomas's home, in the sunroom with its warm wooden floors and wide windows overlooking the autumn trees. I chose that location intentionally, neutral ground, peaceful, far from their domain. I had arranged the binder neatly on the coffee table. I sat tall in my chair, hands steady in my lap. When my parents arrived, they entered with the air of people ready to negotiate, not confess. My mother carried her usual composure like a shield. My father held himself with brittle authority. I greeted them calmly. Offered tea. They declined. My mother got straight to the point. "Margaret, have you reconsidered the provision?" I gestured to the binder. "Actually, I'd like to talk about that." My father frowned. "What's all this?" "Information," I said quietly. "The information you refused to provide." I opened the binder. Page by page, I slid documents toward them. The home equity loan. The civil notice. The short-term debts. The real estate venture documentation. The attorney's letters. The settlement estimate. David's email. The legal complaint. With each new sheet of paper, My parents' faces changed. First confusion. Then fear. Then something like indignation. My father's voice trembled. Where did you get all this? It's public, I said simply. My mother tried to regain her composure. You had no right. I have every right, I said, my voice steady. You tried to involve me financially in a legal settlement without telling me the truth. My father slammed his palm on the table. We did what we had to do. No, I corrected. You did what you wanted to do, and expected me to absorb the consequences. My mother's voice cracked. We didn't think you'd react this way. Because you assumed I'd bend, I said softly. Silence. I leaned forward. I'm not giving you $50,000. I'm not putting anything in my prenup. I'm not participating in your settlement. And I will not allow emotional manipulation to dictate my life anymore. My father's eyes burned with wounded pride. If you don't help us, we could lose everything. I nodded. I know. And I'm sorry. But losing everything is a consequence of your decisions, not mine. My mother whispered. How can you be so cold? I exhaled slowly. Cold would be abandoning you. This is honesty. Honesty with boundaries. They stared at me. Small, suddenly, without the armor of control. I closed the binder gently. You can choose how you move forward. But I'm done being your safety net. I stood. They didn't. For the first time in my life, I walked away from them without guilt weighing on my shoulders. I expected estrangement, but what followed was far more complicated. For weeks, silence settled between us like fog. My parents didn't call. I didn't reach out. I gave them space, not out of resentment, but out of respect. People need quiet to reckon with their own choices. But consequences don't wait. David called first. It's all coming out, he said quietly. They had to disclose everything to their attorney. They're shaken. The settlement went forward. My parents had to sell several possessions they once used to signal status. My father returned to part-time consulting work he had once declared beneath him. My mother resigned from the social clubs where she had crafted her carefully maintained identity. Their world shrank, not out of punishment but out of necessity. And strangely, it seemed to soften them. Meanwhile, my life flourished. My daughter helped finalize wedding plans. Thomas and I spent evenings cooking together, laughing together, building a life together not rooted in obligation but partnership. Our children blended gently, not forced together but woven naturally. The wedding day arrived in a blaze of amber leaves and soft sunlight. My dress was simple. The ceremony was quiet. When Thomas spoke his vows, I felt a warmth fill my chest that no hardship could diminish. My parents did not attend. But the absence didn't wound me. It simply confirmed what I already knew. They were not ready. The reception was beautiful. Candlelight flickered against smiling faces. Laughter drifted through the yard like gentle music. My daughter held my hand and whispered, "Mom, you deserve all of this." For the first time in decades, I believed her. But just as I closed the chapter, an unexpected knock arrived on my door, a month after the wedding. It was a quiet November afternoon when the knock came. I opened the door to find my mother standing there alone, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No jewelry, no makeup, no mask. Just a woman stripped of pretense. "May I come in?" she asked softly. We sat in the living room, the late sunlight warming the rug beneath our feet. She took a deep breath, hands trembling. "I've come to apologize," she said. I waited. For the money. For the pressure. For all of it. Her voice cracked. "We were drowning, Margaret. And instead of asking for help like adults, we tried to manipulate you the way we always have. I'm ashamed." I felt my throat tighten. She continued. "I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of appearing weak. Afraid of admitting we were wrong. And beneath all of that," her eyes dampened, I was afraid of losing you. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I can't fix your childhood, she whispered. I can't undo the ways we failed you. But I want to be better. If you'll let me. I inhaled slowly. I don't hate you, I said gently. I never did. I just needed boundaries. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. We needed them too. We just didn't realize it. We sat there for a long time without speaking, the silence no longer heavy but healing. As she stood to leave, she said something I will never forget. Thank you for saying no. If you had paid us, we would have kept living the way we always have. Sometimes the kindest thing is not giving people what they want, but what they need. After she left, I stood by the window watching her walk down the path, unsure of what the future would bring, but certain of one thing. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet reclaiming of your own life. The steady refusal to repeat old patterns. The gentle insistence on truth. And forgiveness, when it comes, doesn't erase the past. It simply frees you from carrying it. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Honesty is not betrayal. And love, real love, requires truth far more than compliance. If this story resonated with you, tell me, what boundaries have you learned to draw in your own life?